You know, there's an old saying that goes something like this: may you live in interesting times. And I don't know about you, but sometimes I wish these times were just a little less interesting. We're living in an era where the news cycle never seems to take a day off, and the pressures of modern life can feel a bit like a New York taxi in rush hour, constantly honking, always urgent, and leaving us a little frazzled by the end of the ride. But stress, my friends, is not a new phenomenon. It's something we've all experienced in one form or another, whether it's the tension of trying to meet a deadline, the worry that comes with balancing family and work, or just that nagging feeling that the world is moving a bit too fast for comfort. And while stress can sometimes feel like an inescapable part of life, it doesn't have to be. Tonight, we're in for a real treat. I'm delighted to introduce a recorded webinar by someone who knows a thing or two about managing stress, Lloyd Kinney. Lloyd has spent years helping people find their center amidst the chaos, and tonight, he's going to share some practical, thoughtful advice on how to keep our cool in these wonderfully stressful times we're all navigating. So sit back, maybe take a deep breath, and get ready to learn how to turn down the volume on stress without having to leave the room. Because if there's one thing we could all use a little more of these days, it's a sense of calm. And with that, I present to you Lloyd Kinney and his insights on stress management.
Hello, welcome to Managing Stress. The fact that you're watching this video probably says that you know something about stress and would like to know a little bit more about managing. And that's what we hope to do today, provide some tips and some processes that will help you manage whatever is coming your way. A bit of background, many years ago, probably when I was a teenager, I became aware of the serenity prayer. It says, God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Fast forward to 1998, I retired after 35 years in sales, marketing, and operations. And I began helping small business owners with what I called performance planning, performance management. That's job descriptions, work plan appraisals, and all those good things. And I ran into a couple of fellows who were complaining about the stresses they were under and the difficulties that they were experiencing on a day-to-day basis. And I was thinking that somehow or other, the concept in the Serenity Prayer, with some research added, might be able to provide some guidance for those people in those situations. And so after a considerable amount of research, what we're sharing with you today is the result. Some of you may find it interesting that the Japanese are well known for their work ethic. And I understand that a few years ago, they created a brand new word. The word is karoshi. Karoshi means death by overwork. And some of you on certain days may feel that you have contracted the same disease. You have a workbook that goes along with this little session. So if you haven't downloaded the workbook now, I suggest that you pause the video and download it, print it so you can make notes. We've provided most of the information on it already, the important things like quotes and steps. But please do that. Also, the action plan forms that we use at the end of the session are also in the workbook. I would be remiss if I did not take a minute or two to thank Randall Adcock for his counseling, his help and guidance, and his technical skills in getting this ready for you. I also want to mention that I'm using two resources today that I'll show you so you know what they look like when I refer to them. This is a special publication from Time Magazine called The Power of Positive Thinking. And it has some really interesting research material in it and some quotes that we're going to share. Second, this is a book by Sean Aker. He's written 3 of them that I'll introduce to you later. But if you haven't read Sean Aker's books, I suggest that it would be well worthwhile. It'll be a real good return on investment as far as your ability to understand all of these things. Lastly, we do have 2 parts to this session today. The first part, about 23 slides, I believe, We'll cover stress prevention. What can we do to put your mind and body in the best position to deal with whatever comes along? And then the second part will be the action plan. That's another 30 some odd slides that will give you all of the steps that you need to put a program in place to deal with it on a more formal basis. When I was starting writing the material for this session, I thought maybe the first thing we should do is try and find a formal, official definition for stress. And so the first thing I did was look at the dictionary. And the dictionary said stress is an emotional or disruptive, upsetting condition occurring in response to adverse external influences and capable of affecting physical health. I think that's fairly accurate from one direction, but what happens if you have physical stresses? So I looked a little further and I found what I think is a very good definition. And this comes from a psychology textbook. And it says, stress is our behavioral tendencies that are in response to an imbalance between situational demands and the resources needed to cope with them. I think that's supremely accurate because, of course, what we experience as stress in any given day is simply a fact that our resources are not sufficient to meet those situational demands placed upon us. Something that we tend to forget, I believe, is that what happens to you often matters less how you react to what happens to you. And one example, I believe, is you've heard the term fight or flight. So you could picture a couple of hunters, our ancestors many thousands of years ago, out trying to hunt down the next meal, and all of a sudden realize that there's an animal pursuing them, considering us the next meal. And one of us decides that, hey, this is too much for me, I'm running. So there's the flight. But the other person says, I think I can take it on. So they decide to fight. So every time we experience some major item, we have to make a decision as how we react to it. You've probably seen situations in everyday life where two people experience the same situation and they reacted totally differently. Why is that? It's because we all have different vulnerabilities and respond to situations differently because we perceive those situations differently. And I'm sure that you'll recognize that when we perceive them differently, our bodies react differently. And if it stresses us, the body's normal reaction is to start producing cortisol. It's a stress hormone. And the symptoms, and I'll just read some symptoms that I found. We have constant cortisol production. It leads to exhaustion, poor sleep, heart disease, memory loss. Longer term, we can become inconsiderate, have insomnia, we lose our appetite, we become domineering or withdrawn. And what does cortisol really do? It's the signal that we're under stress. We need to conserve our energy. And how do you and I, as human beings, conserve energy? We store fat. And so you'll find that a lot of people, if they're stressed significantly, their bodies start to conserve energy in the form of fat. Physical activity can affect psychological health, and psychological issues can have physical results. So do you have examples of that where you had some real stressful situations psychologically and it got to the point where you were sick to your stomach? Places where you worked too hard and then as a result couldn't sleep at night? Situations like that. I'm told that officially, quite often, if you have physical activity that's too much, you have a pain reaction, but you become mentally fatigued. You might be unable to sleep and you have difficulty concentrating. If you have psychological stress, it can actually affect your immune system, your digestive system, and in both cases, here comes cortisol. When someone mentions stress symptoms, what words come to mind for you? And you may experience it differently than others, but I want to share a couple of examples. Excuse me. You may be old enough to remember a National Hockey League goalie named Glenn Hall. In fact, I understand he still lives on an acreage near Stony Plain. He was an excellent goalkeeper, but he was well known as having skipped pregame meals with his teammates. Why did he skip the meals? He became so stressed at prior to almost every game that he lost his meal anyway. So he decided he just wouldn't eat. It made him sick to his stomach just thinking about the game. And you might wonder how that would happen, but it's a typical example of too much psychological stress causing physical problems. Another one that I found interesting in my research, there was an earthquake in Los Angeles, California in 1994. On the day of the earthquake, there were 101 heart attacks resulting in death. Death by heart attacks, 101 in one day. And some researchers were wondering what it was about an earthquake that would cause heart attack deaths. They wondered, how did that compare with previous days? So they looked at the 7 days prior to the earthquake, and the average number of heart attack deaths in any given day was 36. So there's a real question to ponder. What was there about the earthquakes that tripled the number of heart attack deaths in a single day? Now, possibly if the heart attack victim was right at the epicenter of the earthquake, maybe the shaking was enough to shake the heart into stress total. Maybe they were a long way away, but then it became the psychological effect of the earthquake and what's going to happen to us and everything else. Another example that I found was marathon runners, which are, of course, under real physical stress running their 26 miles. And this one particular situation, one runner had taken the lead right from the start and led through the entire race. And the person who wound up to the end in second place noticed that just a few hundred yards before the finish line, the lead runner literally slowed right down, became disoriented. He wasn't even aware where the finish line was. The physical stress had really affected his psychological abilities. The second place runner, after being so impressed with the first place runner's abilities, came up to him and literally helped him and pushed him across the finish line. So he still won the race, but it just shows what physical stress can do in that regard. So what are some causes of stress for employees in your field of work? And here's a spot where if we were doing a live session, I would suggest we have a little discussion about this and we can share notes and compare experiences. In lieu of that, what I would suggest you do is talk to friends, relatives, and especially coworkers, and talk about some of the things that are stressing in your workplace. Are there things that you might do or consider? And maybe you'll have some other ideas when we get through this session. We want to just look at a number of causes of stress, and these are common, but I think it's worthwhile mentioning. And we'll go through these just up and down and across. Loneliness first, and I'm sure you're familiar with a lot of the issues that came up during COVID with long-term care patients really being stressed because they couldn't have any visitors. Too much loneliness. Grief, and we often hear of that, deaths in the family, very serious illness. Fatigue, and we just talked about that. Self-image, that's a huge issue for young people, especially young girls who think that they must look like a movie star, or boys that think they must look like Arnold Schwarzenegger or someone else in a Mr. Universe contest. Relationships, if that wasn't a problem, we wouldn't have so many divorces in our society. Time demands. How many times have you experienced this, excuse me, where you're doing two or three things or had to do two or three things in a given day. And then someone comes along and says, well, here are a couple other priorities we have to fit in. The workplace in general, and each workplace is probably different to some degree. Change. Isn't it strange how some people can accept change and modify either activities or behavior with much trouble? Others are really stressed just from the point of considering it change. Finances. We've heard a lot about that in recent months with the interest rates and the fact that young people can't afford to buy homes and money just being a problem. Anxiety, common in a whole lot of different ways. Fear is the same thing, and loss of sleep. We're going to talk about sleep a little bit more later, but I've heard a couple of times it's more over 60% of North Americans are sleep deprived, the adults at least, and that becomes a serious problem. Before we leave this slide, I just want you to look at that graphic in the top left corner. It's gray, and it appears at first glance that we've got a whole lot of designs that are kind of interchanging places and scrolling past each other. It's the games that perception plays on our brain. Because in fact, those are two designs, concentric circles, never touch. But that's not what we perceive quite often when we look at it for the first time. Stress cannot and likely should not be totally prevented or completely eliminated. Some stress is necessary for performance. However, if it is understood, it can be effectively managed. I found one interesting study on stress, and it was in a lab using mice, of course, but I think the concept is logical. They had three cages. The first cage had too many mice in it. The mice had to compete for places to sleep. They had to fight for enough food to eat. Very high stress situation. They had another one where it was the exact opposite, where there were few mice. They were probably gloating about the fact that they could eat as much as they wanted and did. And then they had a third one where they had a little bit of stress. They had to fight a little bit for food on some occasions, but it wasn't too bad. Conclusion of the study was that when they analyzed the individual mice, they found that the mice that were the healthiest and lived the longest were ones that had a little bit of stress. They lived longer and they were healthier than either the really stressed or the no stress stages. Significant. So our objective today is to provide you with some prevention techniques so that you're better able to cope with these situational demands. And for what you can't prevent, we create an action plan so that you can address them in a controlled manner. Some psychologists put together what they called stress prevention factors. And here are the 6 of them: commitment, control, challenge, optimism, and humor. And they said that these 6 were significant because each of them played a part in helping us being able to cope with those situational demands. So let's look at them individually. Commitment. Having a sense of commitment provides a purpose and direction in life, which can create a feeling of stability and security, reducing stress by giving individuals a sense of meaning and fulfillment. Well, it also said that 3 areas tended to be the most common people to have commitment toward. Excuse me. Those 3 were work, family, and spirituality. That if we have a social support network with those things, it certainly helps us able to cope. I read of a nurse practitioner in Arizona. Excuse me, I have a sip of water. This nurse practitioner specializes in stress. And she says that nurturing healthy relationships provides a resource for coping. So having a commitment to something meaningful. Control. Feeling in control of one's circumstances and environment can reduce stress by empowering individuals to manage challenges effectively and make choices that align with their goals and values. The three words that kept coming up when I was doing research were planning, organizing, and prioritizing. Seem to have the biggest effect on the control we feel of our lives. Now, the worksheets that we're going to share with you at the end of the session, I think will really help you with control. But I think if you look at people that you've worked with, those that were able to plan things out, organize them, and I believe probably the most important was prioritization. So many people, if you give them a number of things to do, will have difficulties. Some will take the easiest ones first and then lose time, not have enough time to finish the tougher ones. They might try doing two or three things at once. They may drop one before it's finished and start another one. It's just very important with prioritizing and being able to control things better that way. Next is challenge. Viewing difficulties as opportunities for growth and learning rather than insurmountable obstacles can reduce stress by fostering resilience and promoting a positive mindset toward adversity. Viewing difficulties as challenges, opportunities to overcome. Problems are opportunities in working clothes, I've read many, many years ago. I want to tell you about a gentleman I met in 2006. His name was John Gardner. He was from South Carolina, a lawyer who owned 6 law offices, but sold them all to market prepaid legal services at the time. He said, I can help more people this way, and I don't have to work 90 hours a week to do it. He seemed to be really good at accepting a challenge. In fact, he was here to present seminars on identity theft because that was really a priority for criminals starting in 2005, 2006. So it was a huge challenge for him to come up with a presentation on identity theft because it just wasn't common back then. Fast forward to about a year and a half ago, and I was watching a video presentation, and the speaker was John's wife, Elizabeth. And she was saying that the things she admired most about her husband were that, first of all, he liked to these challenges, view the problem as an opportunity to solve something. And the second thing was that she said their family encountered difficulties and crises every once in a while, just like most of us do. But he said he'd accept the challenge, be convinced that they could get through it. What was important was that she said after the problem was solved and everything had come back to normal, John would say, okay, what was good about it? He would always find something good about what had happened. He'd learn from the experiences and always put a positive spin on it. So I think it's really important to keep that in mind. And even yourself, if you and a couple of team members run into a problem and you diligently work at it and you do get a solution to it, does it not make you feel pretty good? I think it's significant. This may come as a surprise, but I believe this is one of the most important of these stress prevention factors. Optimism. Maintaining an optimistic outlook can reduce stress by shifting focus away from negative thoughts and emotions, promoting hope, enhancing coping mechanisms in challenging situations. Those who tend to think positively are optimistic, find meaning in problems, and they're better able to cope, put it simply. Refrain from complaining. I remember on my way to a meeting one day, and I was listening to talk radio, and the host had a guest from the U.S. who was speaking about a group that they were a part of. They had met regularly to address stressful situations and problems that they were experiencing. One thing they noticed about themselves was that they tended to complain a lot. When anything bad came up, they complained about this and that. She said that they decided they might try and do something about it. So what they did was bought a bunch of very stiff elastic bracelets. They committed to every time they thought about complaining, they'd snap that elastic on their bracelet, enough to send a message to the brain. Well, she admitted after several weeks, they admitted that they stopped complaining as much. Very little complaining going on at the meetings. Here was the real impressive part. She said all of them admitted that they were happier just by not complaining. And I think the best way might be to sum it up with Winston Churchill's quote. He said, "An optimist, we get this right, an optimist finds a optimist finds an opportunity in every problem. A pessimist finds a problem in every opportunity." We'll get that right. So just think about that. Time magazine, that I just introduced you to, said optimists are 5 times less likely than pessimists to get burnt out. Think about that. Optimists are 5 times less likely than pessimists to be burnt out. And if you're in sales, here's a critical one. If you're in sales, optimistic salespeople outsell their pessimistic counterparts by 56%. 56% better sales than pessimistic people. Henry Ford put it well too. He said, if you think you can, or you think you can't, you're probably right. Number 5 is humor. Using humor to lighten difficult situations can reduce stress by providing a mental and emotional break, promoting relaxation, fostering connections with others through shared laughter. The U of A once had a group that met. It was part of their stress and depression treatments, and they concentrated on laughter, telling humorous stories. I recently heard that 5 minutes of hearty laughter per day will equate to 5 pounds of weight loss in a year. Now, you might say 5 pounds weight loss in a year is nothing to scream about. That's probably true, but with 5 minutes of healthy laughter, isn't that a fun way to lose those 5 pounds? And smiling and laughing have a positive effect on your outlook. Jean Monroe said laughter is free and it has no known side effects. I also read that spontaneous laughter helps prevent hardening of the attitude. In fact, I found another piece of information that said there are actually 6 health benefits of laughter. Promotes relaxation, boosts your immune system, improves your mood, prevents heart disease, shifts your perspective, provides social benefits. So with that, I have a recommendation for you. If you meet with coworkers for coffee or lunch, why don't you take turns each day? Somebody brings a humorous story or a joke or two to work. That hearty laughter might help. If you tend to work by yourself or you're working from home, maybe what you should do is just buy a humorous magazine or a joke book or two and spend 5 minutes before work every day, just getting that 5 minutes of hearty laughter with reading some humorous stories. Worth a try. Lifestyle factors. Go to bed at the same time every day. Sleep 7 to 8 hours per night, preferably all at once. Start each day with a good breakfast, including some protein. Have 5 small meals each day to provide blood sugar and insulin at constant levels. Exercise regularly. Remember I mentioned that too many of us in North America are sleep deprived. One report said that if you're awake 17 to 19 hours continuously, the response by your body is the same as a blood alcohol level of 0.05%. That's impaired, legally impaired in Europe. Just think, 19 hours without sleep, same as 0.05% alcohol. It also said that it produces 50% slower reaction time. So when I read that, I just thought of traffic accidents. How many traffic accidents were there where the driver had half a second, 0.5 seconds to react to avoid the accident? but they were short on sleep and it took 1 second instead of half a second. Too much to prevent the accident. So getting sleep deprived has some consequences we should be aware of. Consistency in sleep habits reduces stress. We're all creatures of habit. We function better that way. If you don't believe me, ask someone who does shift work and has their shifts change frequently. It's really hard on the body and the mind. And one other item that I thought was interesting, there was a study in the United Kingdom on napping. And some of us, I myself, have a little nap most afternoons. They said that a nap every day will increase your lifespan by 2.6 to 6.5 years. That's significant. Two caveats on that. First of all, the nap has to be prior to 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and it must be less than 30 minutes. But that sounds like a good way to increase your lifespan and doesn't take an awful lot of time. Next subheading is nutrition. A US study found that if you skip breakfast, it increases your risk of diabetes by 21%. So don't skip breakfast. And that accounted for the situation, even though you didn't worry about body mass index, excluding that as part of the criteria. They also said that it's a positive step. Good nutrition is a positive step toward diabetes prevention, period. Lastly, exercise. The Mayo Clinic suggests there are 7 benefits to exercise. I'll just read those for you. Weight control, combats health conditions and disease, improves sex life and intimacy, improves mood, boosts energy and stamina, can be fun, use both cardio and strength. Exercise has our body produce endorphins, which is the feel-good chemical. Exercise improves your mood in as little as 10 minutes. And research has shown that the biggest bang for your buck in exercise is about 30 minutes per day. Doesn't mean you'll get benefits with more or less than 30 minutes, but the biggest bang for the buck, 30 minutes per day. And a few extra lifestyle factors each day, 2 or 3 minutes to write down 3 things that you are grateful for or make you happy. That is a subject, and the idea came from some research that Sean Aker did. And I can tell you that it is practical. In 3 or 4 weeks, your brain will begin to change. And here's why. If you know that at the end of the day, you've committed to yourself that you're going to come up with 2 or 3 or more things that happened during the day that made you feel happy, improved your mood, or that you were grateful for. And after 3 or 4 weeks, as it says there, you'll find that during the day, you spend less time looking on the negatives or the things that did not work out right because you're concentrating on the positives and the good things that happened and what you're grateful for. Helping your mind and body develop the resources needed to cope with situational demands. That's what this whole process is about. And we hope that there were some worthwhile ideas so far. It's called prioritizing self-care. Allocate time for self-care activities that promote relaxation and well-being, such as exercise, meditation, hobbies, and spending time with loved ones. So keep all of that in mind as part of your whole stress prevention strategy, and I think you'll find that's going to be useful. All right, with that, I think we're going to move on to the practical side of planning a process. And for those of you who don't have time to attend the whole session here, you could come back later and look at this part. But that was the prevention side. If that's all the time you have, a good with stress prevention. But please come back and watch the rest. All right, here is Sean Aker. He's the Harvard University graduate who spent 10 years researching happiness. There are the 3 books The Happiness Advantage, Before Happiness, and the Big Potential. He studied 1,600 Harvard students. He worked with companies and schools in 51 countries. Here's the key. When he was at Harvard, they had a problem and had the problem for many years. They said that 60 to 80%, we'll say 70 for easy figuring here, 70% of students after the first semester in every first year class were either stressed or depressed. 70% on average. And they had studied this stressed group many times, and no one could figure out why those people were stressed. Sean Aker and his associates decided, hey, if we can't figure out what was wrong with the ones that what they were missing to have them become stressed and depressed, why don't we look at the ones that weren't depressed? So they did. Guess what the deciding factor was? The ones who were not stressed or depressed all scored high with positivity and optimism. Now, do we think it's worthwhile to be optimistic and positive? And those are choices. Here's why. Most companies and schools follow this formula. If you work harder, you will be more successful, and then you will be happy. Don't you know of people that are thinking, you know, if I just had a better job, if I just had another $1,000 every month, I could buy a bigger house, I could buy a cottage, go on a bigger holiday, and that would make me happy. I'd be happy. Based on science, we now know that is backward. Happiness is a choice. When we choose to be happy, we are much more likely to be successful. And in Sean Aker's books, he has research study after research study that demonstrates that this is true. If you are happy in the first place, you're much more apt to be successful no matter what you're doing. Time magazine, in that special edition, they say optimistic men and women are 50% more likely to reach 85 years of age than their negative counterparts. Don't know why they picked 85 years of age, but they said that that's the key. Optimistic men and women are 50% more likely to get there. They also said people with a positive outlook are 13% less likely to have a heart attack than their negative counterparts. Less likely. Here's the key. Beware of destination addiction. And I alluded to that just a minute ago. Preoccupation with the idea that happiness is in the next place, the next job, or the next partner. Until you give up the idea that happiness is somewhere else, it will never be where you are. So make happiness be where you are to start with. In fact, and this is also from Sean Aker's research, 75% of our job success is predicted not by intelligence and technical skills, but by your optimism, social support network, and the ability to manage and energy and stress in a positive way. I have another seminar that I present to business owners. It's called it's called Hire for HIPAA, Train for Skill. And we've had seminars all over from Calgary to Fort McMurray. We have the owners and managers of businesses who are in the audience. We ask them to write words down that define the superior employees that they have encountered through their careers. Just write the initials or the names down. Now write 2 or 3 words that describe what it was that made those employees superior. And then we come back to them and say, look, all of us have 2 categories of abilities. One is personal inherent characteristics, things we're born with, things we learn as a very young child. And we have learned characteristics. That's our education, high school, post-secondary work experience. And then we ask the folks in the audience, now, Beside all of those words that were a learned characteristic, put L beside it. For all those that were personal inherent characteristics, put a P beside it. And I can tell you that in all those, somewhere between 60 and 95% of the words of the superior employees were personal inherent characteristics, nothing to do with education or work experience. So that's why we say when you're hiring somebody, that's who you're looking for. And you know why, because of all of this optimism and positivity. So that takes us directly to the serenity principle. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. So let's look at those words very quickly. Serenity, tranquility, undisturbed peace of mind. Serenity could be described as an absence of stress or situational demands, and coping resources are in perfect balance. Courage, bravery, steadfastly face danger, opposition, or hardship. Meeting various situational demands may require us to face some difficulties. And wisdom, the power or faculty of forming a sound judgment in any matter. Wisdom is knowledge tempered by experience. We're going to have to effectively managing stress will require wisdom. We must realize that before we start. So we have a little 12-step process. Step one is accept the things we cannot change. These have the greatest effect on our physical and psychological well-being. We can accept them only when we've identified them. And I can tell you that I was born and raised on a farm, and what do farmers worry about the most? The weather, because their well-being is defined by the weather. However, how much can we control the weather? We can't. So why would we waste physical, mental energy even thinking about it? If there's a hurricane or a tornado coming and there's things we should batten down, yeah, you can do the preparation. You can't worry about the weather itself. I'm going to give you an exercise. I would like to take 30 seconds, and I want you to just close your eyes, think of all of the things that have been stressing you over the last week or two, and identify 2 or 3 that you now realize you don't have any control over. So we'll actually do this. Start now. Think about everything that you've got that are worrying you. Identify 2 or 3 that you have no control over. Start now. There, that's 30 seconds. Did you identify 2 or 3 things that you have no control over, but you've been spending time thinking about or worrying about? The bottom line is that that's a waste of time. I would also suggest that that's probably more time, that 30 seconds was more time than you've spent identifying those things in the last number of weeks. We need to take that seriously and just take it out of our thinking process. Step 2, change the things we can. Developing coping strategies for the most common stressful situations. Priorities must be determined. An action plan must be developed and completed. Once you've done a formal process and you work with it over a number of months, you'll find that you don't need to write anything down. You'll do it all mentally. But to start with, we have to do some planning in a more formal manner. Step 3, know the difference. We tend to be overwhelmed, the most difficult part to accomplish, but a huge step forward when we're determined which issues are controllable and which are not. How could you develop a thought process to determine which issues are within your control? So many of us try to do too many things at once. You know, I've heard many claims that I'm a fantastic multitasker. Well, I've read some psychological studies that said that's virtually impossible. The brain can actually do only one thing at once. And the other thing is that even if you are interrupted numerous times, you're losing about 10 minutes of concentration time every time you're interrupted. And so we've got to remember that these are time costs. We feel overwhelmed. We try to do too many things at once. We never complete a project before we start another one, or we don't prioritize. And there's the prioritization coming back again. So let's get started on a plan. Peter Drucker said plans are only good intentions unless they immediately degenerate into hard work. So here's step 4. Identify stressors. Recognize and list the specific factors or situations that trigger stress in your life. Work deadlines, personal relationships, financial concerns. Identify them. The whole point here is that if we can identify them, then maybe we can put an action plan in place to address them. And here's how we start. Here's worksheet number 1, and it's in your workbook. You'll notice there's 3 headings. Work-related issues are concerned, all of them, whether you can control them or not. I just want you to put them all down in that first column. Identify stressors we cannot change. Okay, so now when you've got that worksheet 1 filled out with everything that's bothering you, identify the specific factors or situations that are outside your control and therefore you cannot be influenced by them. You must eliminate them. There's no use thinking about them when you can't control them. So I want you to go to that sheet, cross off ones that you have no control over, and then put a check mark under no control. How many of you routinely make lists of things to do, things that have to be accomplished? Okay, how do you feel when you can cross it off or check it off, or both? Usually makes us feel good when we do that. Do that with this worksheet. Draw a line through the things you have no control over, put a check mark under it, and mentally do your best to eliminate it from your thinking. So there's the 2 columns. Work-related issues and not within my control. Cross it off, check it off. Step 6, identify stressors you've already addressed. Sometimes we have things that we have some control over, but we've already done everything we can. So recognize and eliminate specific factors or situations that are within your control, but which you have already acted upon. Don't worry about it some more if you've already done everything you can. So go back to that same worksheet and put check marks in that right column, draw a line through it, get it off your to-do list. Now is the time to start putting things in place so that we can deal with the things that you have control over, and we want to put an action plan in place to address them. First, with step 7 in the entire process, evaluate your current coping mechanisms, determining which ones are effective in managing stress and which ones may need improvement. Do you tend to do everything by yourself? Are there people you should be talking to, for example? Are there lists you could make of things that you could do for a situation? And then cross that off when you've done it. Assess your coping strategies. Step 8, set realistic goals. Establish achievable goals for reducing stress, such as delegating tasks, setting boundaries, seeking support from others. Those could be specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, time-dependent. All of the things that you need to think about when you're establishing goals. But we need to be realistic. If we just write things down and think we're getting everything done in the next 2 or 3 weeks, unfortunately, it's just not going to work. Be realistic. Step 9, practice stress reduction techniques. Incorporate stress reduction techniques into your daily routine, such as deep breathing exercises, mindfulness, progressive muscle relaxation, or visualization. If you check with local agencies, I think you'll find that there are places you can go to take some training in some of these. activities to improve your stress reduction techniques. Reach out to friends, family, or mental health professionals for support and guidance in managing stress. Don't hesitate to ask for help. You know, there are far too many of us that think we can solve all of our problems ourselves and we don't need any help. But that's just not true. So we should feel willing and able to contact other people. Managing stress by taking control with what, when, and by whom. Create your activity plan. Regularly review your stress management plan. Monitor your progress. Keep adjustments as necessary to ensure effectiveness in reducing stress levels over time. And how do we do that? With worksheet number 2. So now what you do is you take all of the things that are not crossed off worksheet number 1. In other words, they are things that you do have some control over, but which you have not done everything you can. There's some things you could still do. So you put those in the first column. Now you have to go to work. In the action on the second column, what are you going to do? What's your deadline in the third column? And who can give you some help in the fourth column? This is the worksheet that will take some time, but here's the good news for you. When you've used this worksheet for several months and become good at it, thereafter, when something comes up, you will immediately in your brain be able to decide whether it's controllable or not. Is there something that you can still do about it? And you will decide, what am I going to do about it? When am I going to do it? And who can help me? That's the good news. Step 12, monitor your progress. Regularly review your stress management action plan, track your progress, make adjustments as necessary to ensure effectiveness in reducing stress levels over time. It's something that you probably have to do with other things in certain types of work, but do it for yourself with stress management. So, for a summary, excuse me, managing stress. Start by developing and utilizing the stress prevention tools to help avoid stressful situations. Just a reminder, commitment to such things as work, family, spirituality. Control, use action plans to methodically control issues and events that are controllable and to determine which are not controllable. Challenge, view difficulties as challenges and opportunities. Optimism, maintain an optimistic, positive attitude. Attitude is everything. Humor, utilize humor to both relieve stress and prevent from taking hold. Lifestyle, sleep, nutrition, exercise. Use your mind to change your brain. And develop the skills necessary to determine which issues and concerns are and which are not within your control. Psychologists say this is one of the toughest things to do, and yet so many of us just ignore it altogether. Identify and accept the issues and concerns that are not within our control. So many of us just think we can control everything. So please learn how to eliminate from thought processes the things over which you have no control. Then develop an action plan, implement it so those concerns are within your control. And you must decide who and when can help you get it done. Paul J. Meyer said, whatever you vividly imagine, ardently desire, sincerely believe, and enthusiastically act upon must inevitably come to pass. Think about those 4 characteristics of that phrase. Vividly imagine it. I'm sure you can do that. Ardently desire, probably possible. Sincerely believe and enthusiastically act upon. I would suggest to you, you can pick almost any idea that you might have, and you won't have a problem with number 1, 2, and 4. The tough part will be if you're honest with yourself, sincerely believe that you can accomplish it. But if you can, you'll be successful. And I have another quote for you that I found that I've used in the past, and I temporarily forgot about it. This is a quote from 1850 years ago. Marcus Aurelius Antoninus. He was an emperor and philosopher of ancient Rome. He said, if you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it. And this you can have the power to revoke at any moment. If you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it, and this you have the power to revoke at any moment. Kind of summary of what we've already been speaking about. So I'll leave you with a challenge. Here's a new version of the Serenity Prayer. Grant me the serenity to accept the people I cannot change, the courage to change the one I can, and the wisdom to know it's me. Sound reasonable, folks? With that, all I will say is that thank you for watching. We hope that you've gained some tips and ideas and the action plan. And please don't hesitate to take those worksheets, make multiple copies. You might even decide to create a list that are work related and another list that is home and personal related. But please use the tips that we provided and the stress prevention factors, and see if we can't put you in a better position to cope. Pardon me. Better position to cope with anything that's coming along. Give yourself those coping strategies. Thank you very much. Good luck.
Thank you, Lloyd. That was wonderful. Thank you for sharing the wisdom on one of the most important and pressing issues of our time, how to cope and manage in a very complex and demanding world. Thank you very much.